Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here on CBS News 24/7. I'm Lana Zach, and you have been watching our CBS News special report. The Supreme Court has been hearing oral arguments on whether former President Donald Trump is immune from prosecution for actions taken while in office. And while the Supreme Court considers this immunity claim, the former president's trial on charges that he tried to overturn the 2020 election is on hold. Now, this is the second case to come before the justices this term that could have major consequences for Trump's political future. Trump's attorney, John Sauer, and the attorney for the special counsel, Michael Dreeben, they both presented their arguments to the court. Have a listen.
I would quote from what Benjamin Franklin said at the Constitutional Convention, which I think reflects best the founders' original understanding and intent here, which is at the Constitutional Convention, Benjamin Franklin said, "History provides one example only of a chief magistrate who was subject to public justice, criminal prosecution," and everybody cried out against that.
No, I understand, but since Benjamin Franklin, everybody has thought, including the presidents who've held the office, that they were taking this office subject to potential criminal prosecution, no?
I don't. I see the opposite. I see all the evidence going the other way.
The existing system is a carefully balanced framework. It protects the president, but not at the high constitutional cost of blanket criminal immunity. That has been the understanding of every president from the framing through Watergate and up to today. This court should preserve it.
We have full team coverage. I want to start first with CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson. So, Jessica, the justices are trying to determine where that line actually should be drawn. What are your takeaways?
My big takeaway is that they really are struggling with where that line is. I absolutely do not count to 5, meaning 5 out of the 9 justices, on either extreme position, on either that there's no immunity or that there's absolute immunity. There's going to be some test crafted that tells us when a president is immune from criminal prosecution and when he or she is not. And of course, this case isn't just about Trump. It's about every future president. And so what I heard the justices coalesce around is a few big questions. Is the question that there is immunity for official acts, but not for private conduct? Then the next question after that, of course, is, well, how do we determine exactly what an official act is? And then there was some more nuanced questions that maybe the dividing line isn't official acts versus private acts, but maybe there are just some core functions that the Constitution gives to the president where there has to be immunity from prosecution. Things like the pardon power, veto power, the power to recognize foreign governments. And then last, and this does get complicated, but there was some question as to whether or not you need, in a congressional statute for there to be clear language that that criminal statute does in fact apply to the president. Do you need this clear language in order to allow there to be a criminal prosecution of the president? Which is all to say, they really were struggling with how do we determine where there will be immunity, where there will not be immunity, and again, where is it appropriate to draw this line, not just for the case pending against the former president, but for all future presidents? And this is going to take a while for them.
And Jessica, on that front, as you're talking about the distinction between an official act as president or a personal act, part of that was actually this discussion about a personal act or the act of running for president, a campaign. And former President Nixon was a line of discussion, as well as former President Ford and his pardon of Nixon. Explain to our audience why those cases are so important as the justices are trying to determine where that line is drawn.
So former President Nixon kind of looms large for a couple of reasons. There are some cases involving him, but with respect to, and the question of immunity and privilege when it comes to presidents. But this question of President Ford granting President Nixon a pardon, I think what that is really brought up to show is that why would President Nixon say, yes, I will accept this pardon after he's in office if there was no possibility that he could be subject to criminal prosecution? And the argument is the granting and accepting of the pardon in and of itself shows that both President Ford and President Nixon understood that there was potential criminal exposure for Nixon. Now, Nixon also comes up in a different scenario, and we can certainly talk about that, where there was case law that was developed by the Supreme Court involving President Nixon, saying that when it comes to civil actions, not criminal actions like the one before us today, but civil actions, that there is, in fact, absolute immunity for a president for official acts. And that's why we heard President Nixon's name a couple of times this morning.
All right, thanks, Jessica. CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford is also outside of the Supreme Court. I want to bring you into this discussion, Jan, because the former president has claimed absolute immunity. Walk us through what you heard from the Trump defense team about how they were trying to support this claim.
Well, that's been their position from the get-go, that he is a president, former president, so he cannot be prosecuted for anything that he did while he was in office. The Supreme Court is not going to embrace that. I absolutely agree with Jessica, because, you know, there are all these other things that we saw the examples about SEAL Team 6 and, you know, how he could basically get away with doing anything. And that's not the kind of democracy that we would want to have. The problem for the court in this case is what they do when they think there should be some immunity, if not all immunity. How do they draw that line, as Jessica said? And I think that's a very difficult question for the court, and I think it's going to take them some time to work through that. I think they're willing to take that time. They took this case because they believe that it is an important case that goes well beyond Donald Trump. And as Justice Alito said, as Justice Gorsuch said, as Justice Kavanaugh said, this case will apply to all future presidents. And as important as it may be for Donald Trump, it's much more important when you think about the future and history of presidents who are in the Oval Office. And so that's going to be their focus. And you saw concerns from some of the liberal justices as well about some of the lingering questions that the lower court did not address here, that I believe that they as justices are going to feel that they have a duty to take up to try to draw those lines.
And Jan, as you say, the kind of democracy that we have, we're reminded of the democracy that we have, hearing the people outside of the Supreme Court. Tell us a little bit about, right, tell us a little bit about what you're hearing. Are there protests going on? We've heard somebody singing. I heard somebody, it sounded like campaigning for the former president.
You know,
have those people turned out for this?
No, it's kind of a ragtag group of protesters who are making more noise than shedding light. So they're playing a lot of music, and, you know, they're dressed up in some kind of crazy gear and marching around. So I'm sorry it's loud, and I'm having a hard time hearing some of the questions. Obviously, it was nothing like this in the courtroom, and I think that's one of the things that really struck me listening to these arguments, was just you really did have a sense that this was an historic case. I mean, the lawyers, I thought, were excellent on both sides. The justices were all very engaged. You didn't see a lot of like, aha, got you. There was an earnestness in all of the justices' questions, trying to really figure this out. And you don't see that in a lot of the cases, because sometimes I think the justices go in feeling like they've read the briefs and they have a pretty good understanding of how the court should decide. Today, it was very much like this is a serious problem. It's going to have long-term ramifications for future presidents and the future of democracy, and we have to get it right. And so for 2.5 hours, as you heard, it was really a searching nature of inquiry from the justices. And I thought the lawyers on both sides did a pretty good job, although the attorney for former President Trump, that's a losing argument. I do not see any way the Supreme Court, I don't even think they would have one vote, actually, for that position. Absolute immunity, no prosecution for official acts. The question is, what do you do in that middle ground where you're going to be able to have some prosecutions, some immunity, how you draw that line?
All right, Jan, I want to bring in now CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane. So, Scott, you've been following both what Jan and Jessica have said in terms of these arguments today, but I want to ask you more about how this immunity case is impacting Trump's criminal case in Washington and the prospects for trial.
Yeah, Jan just masterfully described the long-term implications here, but there are some very important short-term implications, too. The Supreme Court has indicated through this extended argument they have concerns, and they would like some clarity. and that there's not unanimity of opinion on the issue of presidential immunity. All of that is bad news for those who want to see Donald Trump go on trial in Washington before the election, because the margin for error to get that back on the calendar before November was already painfully small, and it might have just disappeared before our eyes as the Supreme Court wrestled with the issue today. Donald Trump's case has been frozen. It's been frozen since the end of 2023 as these appeals played on the issue of presidential immunity. And Jack Smith tried, unsuccessfully in December, to expedite this, to get this right in front of the Supreme Court so they could hash all this out in December. They didn't. They wanted the appeals court to do its business first. That took a couple of months. Then the Supreme Court watched the appeals court ruling come down and decided they wanted to get involved after all. But then they scheduled the arguments 2 months later for today. They may not issue a ruling for 2 more months. All of this is time lost in the Donald Trump 2020 election conspiracy case down the street at the federal courthouse near Capitol Hill. And it seems not tenable to get this thing back on the calendar unless the Supreme Court were to rule swiftly and overwhelmingly that the case should go right to trial. And that doesn't seem clear based on what we saw today and what Jan has just reported.
All right. Scott MacFarlane, as well as Jessica Levinson and Jan Crawford, thank you all.